In the 1670s, Charles II commissioned a portrait of himself in his garden. In this picture, he is not depicted wearing his ceremonial robes of state, nor his royal armor. No, he simply wears some fashionable clothing, relatively demure for a 17th century king. Nevertheless, his authority, his power, his wealth are on display in this picture. And it's not because of the house or the gardens that are depicted, nor is it the man kneeling in supplication. No, it is what this kneeling man holds in his hands. Something that would be immediately apparent to a 17th, 18th, 19th century observer. For the gardener down on bended knee holds a pineapple aloft, presenting it to Charles II. In fact, legends say that this was the very first pineapple that was grown in England, king pine, though we now know that it was more than likely imported. And that this tale was merely told to embiggen the prestige of the king. You see, at the time, England and France were both in dispute over an island in the Caribbean known as St. Kitts. When the French ambassador joined King Charles II for dinner to discuss the matter, the king had a pineapple called to his dinner table. There he cut it up and ate it in front of the stunned French ambassador. In doing this, Charles II was asserting England's global power. And this isn't the only painting to put pineapples on display, far from it. There are hundreds of paintings with pineapples. Some of them pineapples are in the background, but in others they are very much the focus of the picture. From royal portraits to political cartoons, pineapples got everywhere, like sand. There are even businesses dedicated to renting out pineapples to the rich and influential so that they could be seen to get their portraits taken with pineapples. Or simply display them at party, or even tuck them underarm for a jaunty stroll showing off their new companion. I guess that Instagram influencers have always existed. But why? Why did people do this? Well, pineapples were a true luxury. They represented an extravagance. Most people couldn't afford them. To have a pineapple meant that one could afford a pineapple. You have to remember, these were not grown in Europe. They couldn't be. Pineapples require a tropical climate, but yet they were delicious, sweet and decadent. When Columbus brought the very first pineapples to the Spanish court, they were in ecstasy. The nobility went wild for them. Jean de Lery wrote that there was no nobler fruit in the universe. I mean, obviously he's never tasted Zim-Zims from the Gorp sector, but we'll not hold it against him. In 1807, an English servant was sentenced to 7 years in Australia for stealing 7 pineapples. Truly, this was a fate worse than death, and his descendants are to this day paying the price, mostly in overcosted space marines. If only they knew the social costs of transportation to Australia. Those judges would have been a lot more lenient, I bet. But once steamships started transporting pineapples to Europe with regularity, the luxuriousness of them diminished. What was once a mythical fruit reserved only for royalty soon became within reach of, God forbid, the working class. And the price dropped and dropped and dropped until this cost me 75p at Tesco. I hope the green screen doesn't get rid of it. I'm gonna be honest, I've only ever had pineapple in alcoholic drinks. I'll just take Jean de Lery's word for it. So what does this have to do with Warhammer? Well, what is the Thunderhawk gunship if not the pineapple of the modern day? Admittedly one that needs to be assembled and painted. Though you can play with it in grey, I'm sure no one will hold that against you. Honestly, I'm surprised that you can't rent out Forge World models to get your picture taken with them for Instagram. We will know that Warhammer has truly hit the mainstream on the day that such a business opens up. And this obviously means that just like the pineapple, Warhammer is an extravagant luxury, right? Well, there was a logic to the luxuriousness of the pineapple. It was rare, for one. Pineapples would spoil on their voyage back to Europe, and this caused them to be difficult and expensive to transport. And because they were impossible to grow in Europe, this was the only means of getting access to them. And the taste of them, to the Europeans at the time, was transcendent, much like how I imagine resin would taste. No, don't eat the resin. You know you can't eat the resin, Discourse. You know that. And so therefore, I understand why pineapples would mostly be bought by kings. But call me crazy here, but I don't think that Warhammer should be reserved for heads of state and landed nobility. And such a statement might be pretty controversial in today's climate. You can't go 2 minutes into a discussion about Warhammer and price without some fucking nitwit coming into the discussion and saying, well, Warhammer's a luxury. Well, Warhammer ain't no fucking pineapple, mate. For one, Warhammer isn't expensive to make. The vast majority of Warhammer models are made from hard plastic, and these have a very big upfront cost. You need to invest in the molds of these models, but that investment means that throughout the rest of their life, they're very cheap to produce. We're talking pennies on the dollar here. Now, it's hard to get exact numbers on this. Much of the information we have is outdated, and much of it is proprietary, so it's hard to get your hands on without a little bit of corporate espionage. But suffice to say, most of the time, Games Workshop will have made back the investment in the mold in the first couple of weeks of release. I have no doubt that a lot of the FOMO marketing that GW indulge in are to recoup the cost of those molds. At the tail end of that hype wave, GW are making nothing but profit. And then for the next 20 years that they sell those models, it's negligible production costs, almost pure profit. And I don't want to go too much into this because we could genuinely be here for hours and hours and hours just discussing this. There is definitely a full video on the business of creating and designing and selling miniatures and going into the production of miniatures and things like that. But suffice to say, we know that the operating margins on Games Workshop are 41%. In the context that 10 to 15% are considered very healthy margins. And this all comes from publicly available information. This isn't hidden. So we know that Warhammer is very profitable, exceptionally so, significantly so, too much so. Warhammer has a cheap material cost and it isn't labor intensive. There's no spoilage, so no special storage requirements, and models don't go off, unless you count the super racist ones that you're not allowed to sell anymore. And storage itself isn't a huge issue. Miniatures are small. Let's be honest, the vast majority of hobbyists have like 300 boxes hidden under their bed. And there's less risk in the Warhammer business when compared to the pineapple trade. The chance of transport ships running afoul of buccaneering these days is really low, though admittedly not 0%. But from the prices, you'd think that getting Warhammer from England to Australia carried all the perils of the 16th century. So why then? Why, if Warhammer is so cheap to make, is it so expensive for us? Why is there this idea that it is a luxury? Because even King Pine came down in price when pineapples were easier to grow and transport. So why not Warhammer too? In the 2000s, when Games Workshop were transferring their metal casts into resin, they called this fine cast, although everyone knows it as field cast these days. Games Workshop said that the savings in production cost would be passed on to the consumer, but it wasn't. They got more expensive. And when hard plastic models have long ago made back the investment money in their molds, the prices don't go down. The opposite, in fact. The prices go up continually. Do you ever think about that? Why not? Truly, this is a racket. Games Workshop don't act according to any market logic because they have the equivalent to a corporate command economy. They set the price of Warhammer and no one can compete with them on that without GW's explicit say-so. Though, admittedly, there are an increasing number of recasters who will sell models, especially those large prestige Forge World miniatures. I guess you can't really call them miniatures at a certain stage, they're so big. And these prestige models are often sold at a fraction of the price. But nevertheless, if you want the real miniatures, you're gonna have to buy either direct from Games Workshop or from one of their mates. I know that third-party stores aren't always friendly to Games Workshop. And this control of the Warhammer product allows Games Workshop to tell the lie that they are a luxury brand, that there is a value in their name being associated with a box of cheap plastic. And here's the thing, all this discussion about whether or not Warhammer is or is not a luxury, it doesn't really matter. I actually don't care whether or not Warhammer is or is not a luxury item, because the real answer is that it shouldn't be. And here's why. Warhammer is a product for casuals. I'm sorry, I get that I have turned myself into a social pariah now, but hear me out. Warhammer is, or at least should be, designed for the miniature wargame newbie. And this is something that One Page Rules understands really well. It's a reason for a lot of their success, in my opinion. GW are a big IP. They have retail outlets. Not a lot of IPs have that, and they even have an inclusion in lots and lots of video games. And this means that there is a sizable demand for Warhammer. A lot of people know about it, a lot of people love it. And as such, they will often be the first miniature war game that most people play. Admittedly, they will also likely be the last miniature war game that most people play. But they do act like a huge advertisement for the wargame hobby. But this means that Games Workshop are the Walmart of miniature wargaming. They're everywhere. And as such, Games Workshop should cater to their main demographic: casual players, painters, and casual hobbyists. And they do this a little. They sell most of their miniatures in hard plastic, which are very easy to work with. Same with the terrain, they sell a lot of hard plastic terrain. They have a line of easy to build miniatures, and they sell contrast paints, which make it very easy to paint with. I applaud all these things. I really like all this stuff. The problem is that they act like a boutique store when it comes to pricing. This is completely contrary to their market position and dominance. This would be like living in a world where McDonald's was charging upscale restaurant prices. And I'm not saying that the products that Warhammer sell are equivalent to junk food. I'm saying that imagine it was only McDonald's that existed and they were charging upscale restaurant prices. There was no Burger King, no KFC. It would be a joke. It's like they don't understand their own business. They could be cheaper. Why aren't they taking advantage of that? See, I don't like it, but I get when certain miniature companies sell expensive products. Take, for example, Night Models. They sell difficult miniatures to work with. They are for more advanced hobbyists or those seeking a challenge, and they sell niche miniature lines. And they are a smaller company without the economy of scale that GW have. Therefore, they have a less efficient production, and I'm almost 100% certain it's 3 guys working in a shed. I understand why their prices are what they are. But Games Workshop are different. They don't have to rely on the 14 Batman miniature game players out there like Night Models do. They have hundreds of thousands of people interested in playing their games, and they own their IP. They don't need to pay royalties like many other miniature game companies do. They could make their games more accessible if they truly wanted to. If Games Workshop were actually ideologically committed to diversity like they claim that they are, then they would do this. They would lower the prices, not just make a blog post. That's easy. Games Workshop are a big box store. It's time they acted like it. And it's this inability to grasp their market position that has led to the big dissonance in their business strategy right now, I think. At a time when the Warhammer IP has never been more popular, when demand has never been this great, sales are falling and more people are dropping out of the hobby. Valrak the other day looks like at risk of falling from Warhammer. Valrak! Have you seen this guy? His first name is Chapter Master. Why is this? What has created this wonderland? Well, it's the price. And the price is informed by the GW's executives' strategy. They cannot fathom a world where Warhammer is truly accessible. Warhammer should be a gateway to the broader miniature game hobby. Instead, it's acting like a rampart. And look, dare I say it, but Warhammer has been a real force for good over this pandemic overall. Honestly, at the beginning of COVID, it was really inspiring. So many people came together to rediscover a beloved hobby or discover it for the first time. People learned new ways to express themselves artistically, to find ways to meditate and distract themselves from what felt like the end of the world. That was a gift, and it brought so many new people into this big hobby. And what did Games Workshop do to all these new hobbyists? Well, they raised the price of the models, of course, at a time when the biggest, most important contribution the Games Workshop could make to society, and one that would also benefit them by funneling tons of new hobbyists into Warhammer, and when all they had to do was continue to simply sell miniatures they were already selling, and when they were already making the most profit in the entire company's history, what did they do? What did they do? They raised the price. Why? Why would they do this? Well, they never quite told us why they put the gun to our head, but we can speculate. That is the type of company that we are dealing with here. And we can't forget that. We can never forget that. Even if they turn a leaf in 5 years, just remember what they did during the pandemic. So when we have this argument about whether or not Warhammer is or is not a luxury brand, just remember it is an irrelevance. Maybe not, who cares? It's missing the forest for the trees. It doesn't matter, it is circle jerk material. Yes, costs everywhere are rising, the cost of living is going up, inflation is getting out of control. But this does not detract from our complaints that Warhammer should be cheaper. There is the capacity for them to be cheaper, they should be cheaper. The price should be going down, not up. And here is a point that often gets left out of the discourse. And that's that even poor people deserve to have fun. They deserve entertainment too. Often Warhammer is called a luxury in a dismissive way, as if it means that it's not important that it be affordable. I can only imagine that those same people say the same thing about Netflix or coffee, cinema tickets, or even video games. Maybe even Army Men. I mean, growing up in Northern Ireland, I had no shortage of Army Men around. And no doubt 10 years ago, they said the same thing about mobile phones and the internet. And no doubt 100 years ago, they said the exact same things about clean drinking water and fruit and vegetables. Like pineapples. See, it's all full circle now. These things change. Our conception of what is or is not a luxury changes over time and depends on where we live. It is a social construct. It is malleable. It's just marketing bullshit and we command what it is. So just let it go. As a discussion, treat it for what it is, an irrelevance. Let's talk instead about the question that truly matters. Do we want more people in the miniature wargaming hobby? Yes or no? Do we want more people to play the game? Yes or no? Do we want people to quit, to be priced out of the hobby? Yes or no? And are we happy for Games Workshop to take a hit to their margins in order to achieve that? Yes or no? For all those people who are arguing that Warhammer is a mere hobby, how would they answer those questions? I get that people don't want to explicitly say, "F the poor, I got mine," but that is the true meaning behind the statement, Warhammer is a luxury. That's what they're actually saying. That's what those words mean. And so they should just come out and say that. I'm sick of all this weaseling around. Just say what you mean. Say what you feel. Just quit with all the euphemism about luxury. Just say, "F the poor, I got mine." At least then we'll understand each other. I'll know who my enemies are. Saying that Warhammer is a luxury contributes nothing at all, except to obfuscate and defend continual price increases, but based on the logic of because I said so. And personally, I'm not a fan. I find it lazy bullshit. And I think it's finally time where this entire idea that Warhammer is a luxury goes where it belongs. Into the trash at the back of Warhammer World, where Games Workshop like to put all their unsold miniatures. You know, they're taking up too much shelf space and they're not actually worth anything anyway, so just throw them in the trash. By the way, security will not let you take anything from there. They are very strict about that. After all, we wouldn't want people to get the accurate impression that Warhammer is pretty f***ing cheap to make. And if you want to hear more about Warhammer prices, why not check out this video here and subscribe to the channel. And a big thank you to my patrons, especially my Space Marine captains, Stephen Jackson and Earthwormia. You are a great help to the channel. And if you want to help support the channel financially, why not check out my Patreon at patreon.com/discourseminiatures. And I will catch you there. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Games Workshop, Delenda Est.